I'm with M.A. Sumanthiran, MP from Jaffna district, very much part of the Tamil National Alliance in Sri Lanka, and Bhavani Fonseka, human rights lawyer and top political analyst. Both of you are in Colombo. I'm in New Delhi. Thank you both for joining me on The Print.
Thanks, Jyoti.
Well, never a dull day, Mr. Sumanthiran, in Sri Lanka. Your president, Gotabaya Rajpaksa, I don't know if he's still president, but anyway, Mr. Rajpaksa has fled the country. He's landed in Malé. That's the latest reports. Although reports from the Maldives are saying that we don't know whether this is his final destination and he could be leaving and going to some other undisclosed country. Be that as it may, but the Sri Lanka Air Force has confirmed that Mr. Gotabaya Rajpaksa has fled. In fact, there's a picture of him that AP has tweeted, Associated Press, of him and his wife, and he's sort of waving. He seems quite happy to leave under these circumstances. Your first comments?
Yeah, he must be quite relieved to get out of the country. I don't know how much more he can run like this. But yeah, he was trying to leave for a couple of days. And I think early as this morning, he managed to get out of the country. So I'm sure he's relieved now that he's away from it all.
The question, Ms. Fonseka, is whether the people of Sri Lanka are relieved and whether you think that he should have been right here to face the law. And what happens now?
So, Jyoti, he still remains the president till he resigns. That letter has yet to reach the speaker as of today morning. So I don't know how things will move in the rest of the day, but then things are very fluid. So we need to remember he remains executive president. And there's been very much mixed reactions about a potential departure. There's a lot of debate even yesterday when he attempted to leave the country. There were some who said that he has to remain in Sri Lanka to face a reckoning for not just the present crisis, but also his role in allegations of serious violations during the war. Whereas the others were saying that he should leave because Sri Lanka needs to move forward in terms of rebuilding and recovery, and him being around is not going to help. So a lot of mixed reaction, but there is definite anger towards Gotabaya Rajpaksa and the family, and that cannot be ignored.
Right. Mr. Sumandar, can I ask you, you're a respected Tamil MP, not just, from Jaffna district, but of course you've been in political life for several years now. What happens now? Like Bhavani said, he remains the president. For how much longer? What happens? Give us a sense of next steps ahead.
Well, he had told the Speaker of Parliament twice that he would resign today. He had told the Prime Minister that he would resign today. These were told to us by both of them at a party leaders meeting in Parliament 2 days ago. I did raise the question as to what would happen if he did not keep his word.
Right.
There was no answer forthcoming from either of them. But the Speaker seemed fairly confident that the president would resign today. Now, since he left early hours in the morning, my own feeling is that he wanted to remain president while he traveled. For reasons such as head of state immunity, etc. He might have wanted that cover while he got to some safe place that he felt secure in. So the delay in this letter being brought out may be due to that. But then if Maldives is not the final destination, I'm not sure whether we have to wait for a few more days until he feels secure to send that letter and actually relinquish the post.
So even if he resigns, assuming that he resigns today, tomorrow, day after, what happens then?
If he resigns, immediately, by operation of law, the Prime Minister becomes the acting president.
Okay.
The Prime Minister must then appoint another person who is already in the cabinet as the acting Prime Minister.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in anticipation of his resignation today, the party leaders met 2 days ago, and we have fixed certain dates to comply with the law when a president resigns.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, Parliament must meet, and the announcement of President's resignation must be announced. So 15th of July, Friday, has been nominated as that date.
Okay.
Thereafter, the Parliament must meet again and receive nominations for the post of President for the balance period of this term. 18th has been nominated as that date. And then 20th has been nominated as the date on which Parliament will sit and vote the new president in. So all those steps have been taken. Therefore, the moment the Speaker has the President's letter in his hands, he will announce it to the country, and then we will go into this particular process. So it will take a week, basically, to conclude this process.
So basically, Bhavani, this, the country is waiting and watching while these steps of due process of law are being undertaken over the next 1 week. Is that correct?
Yes, people are waiting, but I don't know how long they're going to wait patiently, because there is real anger in terms of the crisis.
Right.
And the protests we've been seeing over the months, this is not something that started a few days ago. The protests since March have seen people coming to the streets because of the hardships they're facing. Now, I don't know how many are going to be pacified by the fact that there is a process underway to establish some form of stability. I think people really need their day-to-day and immediate needs addressed. So it's a very fluid situation on the ground.
So, Mr. Sumanthiran, what is so special about July the 13th? I mean, over the weekend, on the 9th of July, we saw how the people crashed the barricades, went into the, so-called presidential palace, his house, Mr. Gotabaya Rajpaksa's house. And what I couldn't believe is that people were playing the piano. I mean, to think that Sri Lankans in the middle of the crisis are playing the piano, I mean, that in itself is a measure of all these emotions, I'm sure, that are sort of swirling around the country.
And swimming in the presidential pool.
Swimming in the pool, eating in his kitchen, lying up in his bed.
Watching cricket, let's not forget that.
Yeah, and when the videos that we saw, and people are saying that this one woman who said, I've come here 3 times just to see what this palace or what this home was like. So what do you make of this? Is it this, what kind of a life did the Rajapaksas lead?
No, the presidential palace, as they call it now, is just the president's house. It used to be called the Queen's house. It's more than 200 years old. It's like it's a symbol of where the sovereign resided or whatever. But some presidents never used it. They never actually lived in it. Even this president did not live in it. I think only the last few months, perhaps he used it as his residence as well. I don't think it can be sort of described as a exorbitantly lavish sort of living or anything like that. It's more like a symbolic of the past, the British kind of thing. So people are curious. It's like a museum, so they just want to go and see.
But what's so special about July the 13th? Why did Gotabaya want to resign on this particular date?
I don't know. A lot of these people are known to consult, various astrologers and decide on dates and times and all that. They sort of follow this kind of thing. So I'm not sure whether this lady called Jnana Akka, who's supposedly his advisor on many matters, advised him on the date. But she obviously has got it wrong because he's had trouble leaving the country.
But Bhavani, isn't that quite incredible that Sri Lankan politicians, well, very much like Indian politicians, may I add, so follow the astrology charts and astrologers so closely, so intimately. So, are you serious? Is this serious that this lady advised him when to quit and what to do next?
Very, very serious, and that's the unfortunate thing is that political leaders, not just the president, but a whole host of political leaders are, I think, much more influenced by astrologers than actual situation on the ground or the constitutional framework. And that's been the reality in Sri Lanka for some time. I mean, if you look at his elder brother, Mahinda Rajapaksa, also relied on astrologers in terms of even calling the election. And that was a disaster for him where he lost. Mm-hmm. So they don't seem to be learning any lessons, but continue to go to these astrologers who have a huge influence. And in a sense, they're actually defining the direction the country is also taking.
And one of the things that we read here is that perhaps the reason that he picked July the 13th is because it's the first full moon day or the Poya day in July. And that is perhaps the first sermon that the Buddha gave after he attained nirvana and the foundation of the Sangha. But be that as it may, it's interesting that the Rajapaksas have aligned their whole political life so closely to the followings of the Buddha. I mean, I'm not sure whether the Buddha would have approved of their actions that are taking place right now. But be that as it may, Mr. Sumanthiran, can I ask you what happens now? I keep asking this question, but where is Mahinda Rajapaksa? Is he still in the country? Where is Basil Rajapaksa? We saw again reports that he was trying to escape, but the Sri Lankan immigration officials did not let him out of the airport.
Yeah, the news that we have is that Basil Rajapaksa has now managed to leave and that he...
So he's managed to leave, is it?
Yeah, we don't know the truth of this, but apparently he was in a flight bound for Bombay. You can check that out in Bombay. Perhaps to be transit in Bombay. He has a valid US passport. And so he can travel to the US. Gotabaya Rajpaksa, of course, gave up his US citizenship and wasn't able to even obtain a visa. So he has to look for some other place to take shelter in. Mahinda Rajapaksa continues to live in Colombo, and everyone knows where he is. So there doesn't seem to be any problem with that.
He's not in a base in Trincomalee or somewhere else on the island.
No, I don't think he's in Trincomalee anymore. He's attended Parliament. At the last Parliament session, he was there. So I don't think Mahinda Rajapaksa is in hiding or anything like that at all. In some sense, the people's anger is not focused on him because he has resigned. See, Gotabaya Rajpaksa also, if he resigned on the 9th of May or any time thereafter, this hounding may not have happened in the way that it's happening now. There were various suggestions of dignified exit plans that were given to him, but he somehow thought that he could hang on and continue in office. The same mistake that Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe is making now.
So he's deeply, Bhavani, is Ranil Wickremesinghe, is he popular? If the law follows its course or according to the constitution, he becomes president, how is that likely to unfold?
So Jyoti, the protesters, and just going by the demands of the protesters, have been very clear with their demands. The first is go home Gotabaya, and the other one is go home Ranil. And so there's no ambiguity in it that Ranil Wickremesinghe needs to go home. At least that's the sense among many of the people. And he's also a member of parliament who came through the national list. He wasn't elected at the last election. So many actually question how he's able to remain in this office, the prime minister's office, when he doesn't have the legitimacy nor the popularity in terms of governance. The defense that he and his supporters seem to indicate is that he has experience. And he's been a sitting prime minister before. But also the question is that he's been a sitting prime minister before, but many of those instances didn't work out quite well. So really, at this time when Sri Lanka is in crisis, is he the best to be leading the country? So there are lots of questions and criticism against Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. And that anger towards him also was seen on Saturday when his private residence, unfortunately, was targeted and torched. Now, that needs to be condemned, that kind of violence, but that's an indicator of the anger towards this one individual.
Right. And just to quickly explain to my viewers, in Sri Lanka, unlike in India, where we have first past the post system in our elections, in Sri Lanka, you have what is called a proportional representation. So part of the parliament is elected directly, first past the post, but another part is also comes through a proportional representation list. And like Ms. Fonseka was saying, Ranil Wickremesinghe has come through that list. Mr. Sumanthiran, can I ask you, it's all very well, Gota go home, Ranil go home, Mahinda, apologize, everybody should face the rule of law. But there seems to be a political vacuum in the country. I mean, Sajid Premadasa, the leader of the opposition SJB party, he has fallen ill, or he's allegedly ill. Maybe he's better now. But there is clearly a political vacuum. I mean, what is the opposition doing now?
Sajid Premadasa took ill, but he's okay now. We have met him a couple of times. In fact, I spoke to him early this morning as well. And the opposition has been planning this transition for about 10 days now, even before the 9th of July, because I think they knew that this will happen. So they were getting ready for an all-party government to be formed. So there are many plans in place to form an all-party government for a short period of time and go for elections at the first available opportunity, so that there can be a fresh mandate given by the people. Now, Sajid Premadasa leads the main opposition party, and therefore is expected to take the reins of government when the government steps down or when something like this happens. And I think they announced 2 days ago that their party's candidate for the post of president for the unexpired term would be Sajid Premadasa himself. Mm-hmm. But there are moves parallelly to see if we can have somebody outside the parliament, or somebody who's not a contender at the elections that will happen very soon. Somebody who can sort of keep the country together, keep the parties together during this difficult period. So that's also happening.
Like who?
The various names have been tossed about. One name that stands out is the former Speaker Karu Jayasuriya. Only issue is that he's not a member of parliament now. Mm-hmm. So there have to be some other measures taken if that is to come through. But that's not the only name. So the idea is important. The idea is to see that you don't put in place as president or prime minister somebody who has the aspiration of forming a government at the next election, because this is an all-party effort to see that everybody stands together during this difficult time, and so that they don't sort of contend with each other during that time. So the search is on as we speak for that kind of unifying personality as well.
So whether it's Karu Jayasuriya or somebody else like him, you would expect this person to bring all the political parties together, including the ruling party, I would imagine.
Yeah. Yes. For a short period of time, very short.
Until elections are held, on the condition that this person does not stand then for the presidential or the prime ministerial post. Yeah. But Bhavani, explain to me, as this unfolds, and of course this takes, this is dominant in the minds of all Sri Lankans and across the world. What is happening to the situation on the ground? How is the, how are people faring? We keep reading that Sri Lanka has run out of petrol completely. How are things now? Can you give me a flavor of what's going on?
So, Jyoti, the situation is rather dire. I mean, if you just see in Colombo and rest of Sri Lanka, there are long queues. I mean, days-long queues for people to even get the limited petrol and diesel. And this is a common sight. There are long queues to get other essential items such as gas. Medicine is in short supply. The levels of malnutrition, I mean, hospitals are now saying they're unable to conduct basic procedures. So things are collapsing and things are extremely dire. And the most hard hit are the vulnerable communities who have been hit during COVID and subsequently as well. So really there is a segment of society who is really suffering. And there are now reports that many are not even able to have 3 meals a day. And the UN has come out and said that Sri Lanka is heading towards starvation. So while we have a political and economic crisis, we are heading towards a looming humanitarian crisis. Things are really, really dire. But one of the things that also one needs to factor in is that this situation is leading to unrest. There are reports now, and we've seen in the media across Sri Lanka, there is growing unrest. And the fear is that if there is no stability and that people feel there is no plan, that the triggers for violence could increase. And that's a very, very dangerous place we're heading towards. So really, we need clarity in terms of who's in charge, the leadership, but what's the plan in the next couple of months?
So it's not, I mean, I'm wondering whether the Rajapaksas saw this at all. I mean, this particular protest, which has now gathered steam or is still gathering steam, has only been around for the last 4 months. But what happened to the Rajapaksas before? Why didn't they see what was going on?
Do you want me to answer?
Yes, please, Bhavani.
Okay. So the Rajapaksas, I think, saw things were heading south for some time. There was advice given to the president and the others in government that things were not looking good and they needed to go to the IMF, for example, much sooner than they have gone. The indicators in terms of the economic situation deteriorating was very much spotted in 2020 and 2021 in the context of a pandemic. But despite all of this, the president even introduced last year the overnight ban on the chemical fertilizer, which has impacted the agriculture sector, which is a direct link to the food security issue in Sri Lanka.
Did he see what was going on? I mean, or was he that disconnected from the ground? I mean, surely his advisors were telling him what was going on.
So the experts were advising that some of these policy decisions were going to have a disastrous impact. But I think there is arrogance in terms of holding this office and thinking they can do anything they want to, and that there are no repercussions. So there is this big question now in terms of political accountability, that the political leadership, regardless of which party, needs to be held to account for their actions. And this is a clear indicator. The crisis is linked to the executive presidency, and that's another call. The polishing of the executive presidency needs to happen ASAP.
So that's the question, Mr. Sumanthiran. Bhavani is saying that the abolition of the executive presidency must take place. I also have a couple of questions. The first question to you is, why didn't you guys in the opposition, why didn't you see what was going on? Didn't you hold the Rajapaksas to account? I mean, you're also complicit in the fact that you remained silent or perhaps didn't speak loud enough.
No, the opposition kept warning of the impending disaster from the time this government took office. In fact, even before that, when Gotabaya Rajpaksa published his election manifesto, he proposed certain reforms, as he called it, to income tax and turnover tax regime. And the finance minister at the time, Mangala Samaravira, immediately said, if you do this, if you implement this, we'll become like Lebanon and Venezuela. And then he also, on another occasion, said, we'll be hit like the Greece crisis. So it was foretold. They went ahead and did it, regardless. So, and then 2 years ago, the main opposition party, Dr. Harsha De Silva, said, go to the IMF. The country's economy is in serious peril. So this has been said, not that it was never said, but right through until February this year, they actually kept saying that the opposition was lying to the people. So this is incomprehensible. I really can't imagine what they were thinking, really.
Well, I suppose you could also, turn around and say to India that the Indian government embraced the Rajapaksas, and perhaps, we must also have thought through this. But anyway, I think that was for different reasons. But can I ask you, Bhavani, you talked about the abolition of the executive presidency. Do you think that that position must go now? And that there could be, that the constitution should be amended? How do you think it should unfold?
Well, Jyoti, I think if anything, this crisis has shown that one individual cannot wield so much power. We for decades have been saying that the abolition of the executive presidency is critical in terms of democracy in Sri Lanka. But those calls were kind of ignored by many. But now that this economic crisis has happened and many see that it's directly linked to this one individual, there is now increasing support for the abolishing of the executive presidency. So there is now a bill by the opposition, this JB, which is actually going down that path in terms of abolishing. And there is support among the public. But even with this crisis, and there's clear evidence that people are supporting it, the government actually brought a very watered down bill to continue to keep the office with certain powers. So it's politics again for many who want to still continue to hold on to particular officers, particular perks. And it's really going against the cause of the people. So this is also worrying that even with this crisis, even when we've got to this position, some in government are continuously be tone deaf in terms of what is needed for Sri Lanka.
And Mr. Sumanthiran, can I ask you about the implementation of the 13th Amendment? I mean, that story is as old as the hills, or at least as old as the 1987 India-Sri Lanka Accord. Now, what is the problem with giving land and police powers to Tamil-dominated provinces in the north and the east?
There's absolutely no problem at all, except a lack of political will and the rulers having that as an instrument in their hand to drive a fear psychosis in the minds of the majority community and using that to come to power, to remain in power, and so on. There's absolutely no reason why that and more devolution cannot be implemented.
So when you say the rulers, you mean the center, which is in Colombo, and Colombo is denying the north and the east provinces in Sri Lanka from exercising powers over the land and police.
Yes, because as you rightly said, in 1987, the 13th Amendment of the Constitution was enacted. And so the constitutional provision today is that the provincial councils must have land and police powers, but that has not been implemented. You're violating the Constitution. They, scream from the rooftop saying that, the Constitution is supreme and this and that and all that kind of thing. But they blatantly, continuously, for all these decades, violating provisions of the Constitution.
But Bhavani, it seems to me like the opposition is also not pressing the point home. Or do you feel that the people of Sri Lanka don't want these powers to be given to the Tamils who dominate the north and east?
So, Jyoti, this issue of power sharing is very divisive in Sri Lanka, and I think that needs to be looked into as to where that comes from. There is deep suspicion among the majority community that sharing power or devolving power is going to lead to something of a separate state, possibly, and there is a historic issue there that needs to be looked at. So there is a failure among the political actors, but also civil society and many others in explaining as to what this means. So for a long time, we've been stuck in a situation of very extremely polarized positions where the majority community is deeply suspicious and the minorities feel they need to have greater power. Now, this is actually the protest, and what's happening in Sri Lanka provides, I think, a unique moment to push through these reforms that have been there on the table for some time, but also engage with the different actors to say, we cannot go back to where we were. We need to move from these entrenched positions. And a reform package includes equality, recognition that all citizens are equal, and power sharing is critical for reconciliation. So those conversations are essential now. But I think the urgency is to ensure that there's some form of stability at the first moment. But these conversations need to happen and communicate to the people.
So the Sinhala, or the majority community, the Sinhalas are fearful that the Tamil minority might secede, Mr. Sumanthiran. I mean, that was over. The civil war finished in 2009. The country won the civil war. The LTT was defeated. Mr. Prabhakaran was killed. That chapter is over. So what are these suspicions about that Bhavani is referring to?
Well, it works for the politicians in the South to keep that fear alive. And so they whip up that psychosis amongst the people. And up to now, it has worked. Until 2019 and 20, it has worked. But we see a big change in the country on that front, particularly amongst the protesters who have resolutely refused to go that way and have publicly said that they will not tolerate racism in that form or any other form. So we see a silver lining now, and that moment also needs to be grasped and taken forward, because along with all the reforms that seem opportune now to be adopted, this also must happen. And perhaps this is the time at which the country is now ready to say, well, we were misled by our politicians all these years. Look around, look at the other countries in the world. Power sharing is the best way possible to keep the country together, rather than be fearful that there'll be secession. So those moments have come, and I think it's up to us now to make most of it.
But as Bhavani says, perhaps the need of the hour first is political stability, and maybe these conversations can come next. Or do you think, Mr. Sumanthiran, that they can take place simultaneously? And is the like the opposition SJB, that's also, I'm sure, majority Sinhala, are they willing to listen to this message?
Yeah, we've had many conversations with them, but I agree with Bhavani that the need of the hour is to bring in some stability, and then these conversations can take place. Last evening, we had a conversation with the protesters. All of the protesters' movements were represented together, and they were proposing that a new constitution must be brought in during this interim period. I mean, we didn't disagree because we agree that a new constitution must happen. But I think looking at it pragmatically, it might be more sensible to sort of keep this interim arrangement as a very short one and ensure that the parliament, the next parliament, is composed of people who will reflect this kind of sentiment rather than the current one, and then move ahead with most of the reform in that phase.
So last question to you, last words from you, Bhavani. Do you think this is a new dawn for Sri Lanka, even if it's a delayed one?
Definitely, Jyoti. I mean, while things are dire on the ground, I feel there is some openings and there is a reawakening of the citizen. I mean, that is quite remarkable, what's been happening in the last few months. And a recognition that we need to do better. We cannot repeat the mistakes of the past, that we have so much. Sri Lanka has a lot of potential. and that we need to do everything possible not to repeat those mistakes, but also to ensure that we do much, much better in terms of peace, stability, and reconciliation in Sri Lanka.
Absolutely. And from all of us here, we wish you all the best. We've seen how protesters have been more or less peaceful, except for those violent incidents that you referred to earlier, the burning down of Ranil Wickremesinghe's private home, and earlier Mahinda Rajapaksa's home as well in Malhotra. But apart from these two blots, I would say that the protesters have been largely peaceful, and really something that the rest of South Asia must learn from all of you in Sri Lanka. But we do wish you the best. And thank you both, Bhavani Fonseka and Mr. M.A. Sumanthiran, Jaffna MP, for joining me on the Print Debates.
Thank you.
Thank you.